Breaking news. Just 5 minutes ago, the FBI uncovered a hidden room in the heart of Elvis Presley's legendary Graceland mansion. What was supposed to be a routine investigation into the iconic singer's past has instead unlocked a Pandora's box, revealing chilling secrets and disturbing evidence that no one could have predicted. When the FBI entered the room, they turned pale upon seeing what was inside. Join us to find out all of the details. A routine preservation project turns unexpected. For over 4 decades, Elvis Presley's Graceland mansion in Memphis, Tennessee stood as both a tribute and a time capsule. A preserved estate welcoming millions of fans, yearning to catch a glimpse of the king's past. Managed by Elvis Presley Enterprises, the site had become part museum, part shrine, with each room carefully maintained in the style it was left in when Elvis passed in 1977. However, in early March 2, 2025, a quiet restoration initiative, launched by Graceland's new historical conservation team, took a surprising turn. The team, working in conjunction with structural engineers and state archivists, had aimed to reinforce a series of lower storage rooms in the basement. During a routine assessment of the foundation, a preservation architect noticed an irregularity behind a section of wall where blueprints indicated solid brick. There was a faint echo. Work was paused, and a ground-penetrating radar scan was performed. To verify the anomaly, the scan revealed a narrow, unmarked space, a cavity that did not exist in any official floor plans. With curiosity mounting, state officials contacted local law enforcement to oversee the removal of the wall. By March 14, the Memphis Police Department, joined by a federal liaison from the FBI, due to the historic nature of the site, arrived on the premises. The wall was carefully removed brick by brick. What lay behind it was a low, dim corridor no wider than a closet door. The air inside was stale, untouched for decades. At the end of the corridor sat a sealed wooden door, its edges crudely reinforced with rusted steel plates, and a single locking mechanism that bore no resemblance to anything modern. Initial visual inspection showed no signs of recent tampering, but questions began to swirl immediately. Why would Elvis, or someone close to him, go to the trouble of constructing a secret room within Graceland? And more pressingly, why had it remained undiscovered for so long? The room revealed. The door creaked open with the weight of time behind it. A thick cloud of dust escaped into the narrow corridor. As the long corroded hinges gave way, the FBI agents, joined by forensic specialists and structural consultants, stepped cautiously into the unknown. What they found inside was not a utility space, nor a forgotten storage room. It was something far more personal. The room was approximately 12 feet by 14 feet, with low ceilings and no ventilation. The walls were lined with old, soundproof padding that cracked and yellowed with time. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling by a frayed wire. It didn't work, so investigators used flashlights to survey the space. There were no windows, no natural light, just silence. What they saw made them go pale. To the left of the room stood a worn-out chaise lounge, the fabric mottled with dust, but still bearing the unmistakable design style of the early 1970s. Beside it sat a small, battered end table with a rotary phone, disconnected and tangled in its own cord. On the floor near the corner was a metal waste bin, overflowing with faded tissue paper and what looked like pages torn from a journal. But the most haunting feature was what covered the walls. There were dozens of pinned photographs, black and white sepia, and a few color prints. Some showed Elvis alone, seated on what looked like that very same chaise. Others captured unfamiliar figures, many with their faces scratched out. The photos were unlabeled. Beneath them, scrawled directly onto the wall in bold, uneven handwriting, were phrases like "must never forget," "control is an illusion," and "always watching." On the floor, a portable tape recorder, tarnished but intact, sat beside a shoebox filled with unlabeled cassette tapes. Forensic teams carefully collected each tape and the player for analysis. Also found in the room was a small medical cabinet. Inside were bottles of medication dating back to the 1970s, many prescribed to Elvis Presley under aliases he was known to use. The labels were faded, but forensic review confirmed that several contained heavy sedatives and stimulants, no longer on the market, raising immediate questions about the purpose of this hidden chamber. What unsettled investigators most was not just what the room contained, but the overwhelming feeling it radiated. A sense that this was not a place of leisure or comfort. It felt like a hideaway born of paranoia, isolation, and fear. Authorities sealed off the room for further forensic testing. Every item was tagged and logged. Experts were called in to assess the psychological nature of the writings on the wall and the context of the artifacts. This was no ordinary celebrity stash. It was something else entirely, something darker. And while Graceland officials remained tight-lipped behind closed doors, conversations turned to a chilling new question. Had Elvis been hiding something? Or was he hiding from someone? Forensic clues and medical echoes. In the days following the room's discovery, the FBI's forensic analyst set up a controlled lab environment to examine the retrieved items. The focus was twofold: determine the origin and content of the tapes, and analyze the medication and written materials for insight into Elvis Presley's mental and physical condition during the final years of his life. The initial findings were startling. Of the 26 tapes found in the shoebox, 19 were intact and playable. They weren't musical recordings. They were voice journals. Elvis's unmistakable voice filled the lab as experts digitized the audio files. But this wasn't the public persona. It was raw, unscripted, and deeply personal. On the tapes, Elvis rambled through long, disjointed monologues. He spoke of insomnia, deep distrust of those closest to him, and a growing belief that he was being watched by government agents. In one tape dated roughly to 1976, he whispers, "They don't want me saying things. I've seen too much, said too much. Even the phone, they're in the phone." He refers repeatedly to the room, the very chamber he had built, and calls it the only safe place left. He mentions experimenting with different medications to quiet the noise, suggesting self-medication as a coping mechanism for his paranoia and deteriorating mental state. The tapes were not just disturbing. They painted a harrowing portrait of a man increasingly consumed by fear. The medications toxicologists examined. The bottles recovered from the rusted cabinet. Several were legally prescribed drugs used to treat anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. But others had more controversial histories. One substance, methaqualone, known more popularly by its brand name Quaalude, was found in significant quantities. Others included barbiturates, like phenobarbital, and strong amphetamines. Though some of these drugs were consistent with medications known to have been prescribed to Elvis during his lifetime, a few bore no pharmacy label at all. Handwritten notations on the bottles instead marked dosages and suggested custom formulation. A particularly potent combination of stimulants and sedatives pointed toward experimentation with chemical regulation of mood and energy. One forensic analyst remarked privately, "These weren't just painkillers. He was likely trying to control his entire mental rhythm, his sleep, his wake cycles, even his memory." The erratic scrawlings on the walls were sent to behavioral analysts and handwriting experts. Early assessments suggested a mixture of high stress, compulsivity, and psychological fragmentation. The phrases repeated across multiple walls. "Control is an illusion they watch in the mirrors." "Somebody's coming" suggested a form of paranoid delusion, possibly bordering on psychosis. A few wall sections even had what looked like tally marks, long vertical slashes in sets of 5. These were found near the chaise and beside the end table, totaling over 300. Some speculated they represented days spent in the room, either in hiding or in self-imposed isolation. taken together the tapes, the meds, the writings. The room was no longer just a hidden space. It was becoming evident that this had served as a safe haven for a man who felt threatened by both real and imagined forces. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Found not in the room itself, but in a hidden drawer beneath the end table, which agents had initially overlooked. Inside was a single yellowed envelope sealed with wax, scrawled on the front in black ink. "If you're reading this, it's already too late." The letter and the list, the sealed envelope, was unlike anything else in the room. Its paper was brittle and yellowing, the wax seal cracked but intact, bearing what appeared to be Annie, entwined in a lightning bolt, crudely stamped. The message scrawled on the front, "If you're reading this, it's already too late," was ominous, but it was the handwriting inside that chilled the team. The most it matched Elvis Presley's known script. Inside the envelope were two items: a folded, handwritten letter and a single page titled simply, "The List," written in tight slanted script. The letter ran just under 2 pages. Despite the letter's barely legible portions, what was readable painted a haunting picture. "They've always watched me since 1958 Germany. That's when I saw it. What they didn't want us to see in that forest. I never forgot. They erased the others. But not me. I remembered everything. The names, the faces." He wrote of surveillance, cryptic visitors at Graceland, and multiple break-ins he claimed were never reported. Elvis believed the room was the only place he could write freely, away from wiretaps and eyes behind the glass. "This isn't paranoia," he insisted in capital letters. "It's preservation. You'll understand when you find the list. If I disappear, it wasn't drugs. It wasn't my heart, it was them. I told the doctor not to trust the pharmacist." That sentence alone set off alarms with the FBI forensic analysts. They began comparing Elvis's claims with reports from his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick, and with pharmaceutical records from Memphis. For years, Dr. Nick had been accused of overprescribing controlled substances to Elvis, but was never formally linked to foul play. This letter hinted at something darker, a warning Elvis believed wouldn't be taken seriously until after his death. The final words were scrawled in a different ink and appeared to have been added hastily. "If this gets out, protect Lisa. She's the only one who'll understand." The list on the second page were 12 names. Most were written in code, only initials or nicknames, but a few stood out clearly. Among them Colonel P, assumed to be Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's infamous manager Dion, double agent unknown identity Langley, asset R.A. likely reference to the CIA, MF, Vatican contact, and Dr. G. Some names were circled, others had question marks beside them. One was crossed out violently. Ink bled through the page. Bobby. Whether this referred to Bobby Kennedy or another Bobby close to Elvis remained a mystery. What troubled the analyst most was the implication of covert operations, intelligence agents, and foreign institutions, all in Elvis Presley's own handwriting. Could the king of rock and roll have been entangled in classified operations during his time overseas? Was his declining health and isolation truly the result of substance abuse, or was it the consequence of long-term psychological trauma sustained while living under real and perceived threats? The letter in the list, though speculative and fragmented, began to shift the case from curiosity to a possible cover-up. Even if only some of it were true, it meant history had missed something monumental about Elvis Presley's final years. But even more compelling was what came next, something the FBI hadn't expected to find. Beneath the floorboards of the secret room, a box containing old photographs, undeveloped film, and something that looked unmistakably like a badge. Photos, film, and a badge. What lay beneath the floorboards of Elvis Presley's secret room took the FBI's investigation in an entirely new direction. Tucked into a hollowed compartment was a dust-covered metal box, its hinges rusted but intact. Inside were 3 items: a stack of black and white photographs, a roll of undeveloped film wrapped in wax paper, and a gleaming badge that appeared to be issued by a now defunct federal agency. This wasn't memorabilia. It wasn't a collector's novelty or fan fiction. These were government-issued items, some dating back to the late 1950s. For investigators, the pieces raised one overwhelming question. Had Elvis Presley been working for the federal government? The badge itself was unlike the honorary ones, often gifted to celebrities. It bore a serial number depatched and authenticated, and a barely visible acronym OI, later confirmed to stand for Office of Covert Operations and Intelligence, an experimental U.S. intelligence division that was quietly absorbed by the CIA. In the early 1970s, the badge seemed authentic. Elvis Presley may have actually been recruited, if not as a full-time operative, then at least as an asset, by a government agency. During the height of Cold War tensions, the answer may lie in his 1958 military deployment to Germany, a pivotal moment in both his career and personal life. The photos, there were at least a dozen photographs, each developed on old fiber-based paper, mostly unmarked. What stunned investigators were the settings and individuals in the images. One photo showed Elvis in military fatigue, standing not on a U.S. base but next to a group of men in civilian suits, none of whom were smiling. Behind them, barely visible, was a building marked with Cyrillic text. This placed him possibly near the East German border. Official military logs never listed Elvis as having traveled beyond U.S. sectors. Another photo was even stranger. Richard Nixon and an unidentified man with blurred features flanked Elvis at what appeared to be a private dinner, while the famous December 1970 meeting between Nixon and Elvis is well documented. This photo didn't match that occasion. It appeared older and more candid. Other images showed folders, sealed crates, and dark corridors, with directional signage written in multiple languages, including Russian and French. They resembled underground facilities, possibly bunkers or storage depots. The film roll, the undeveloped roll of film, was immediately flown to Quantico for chemical analysis and restoration. Lab specialists estimated it had been exposed over 50 years earlier. It would take days, maybe weeks, to develop safely. But the handwritten note tucked alongside it read, "For when the lies start unraveling." Whatever was on that film, Elvis had deemed it the final piece in a puzzle he never expected anyone to solve in his lifetime. And he was right until now. No one had known the discovery of these artifacts, physical proof of a government connection, a secret role, and concealed events, reframed every assumption about the man dubbed the King. His paranoia may not have been delusional. His descent into isolation might have been self-protective, not self-destructive. One lingering mystery remained. Why hide all this? Why preserve it under the floorboards? Unless Presley feared even his family discovering it. As the forensic team worked to decode the next round of evidence, the FBI quietly reopened old files related to Presley's military service, medical treatment, and federal connections. The badge was only the beginning, but what came next would cast an even darker shadow over Elvis's final years, one tied to the cocktail of drugs in his system when he died and to the doctor who'd administered them. Prescription for control. The newly uncovered items, the badge, the photographs, and the undeveloped film had already shattered public understanding of who Elvis Presley might have truly been. But as investigators dug deeper, their attention turned to another realm that had long been shrouded in suspicion. Elvis's medical history, specifically the pharmaceuticals that coursed through his system during his final years. What had once been chalked up to rock star excess now demanded forensic re-evaluation. The official cause of Elvis Presley's death in 1977 was listed as a heart attack, complicated by polypharmacy, the use of multiple prescription medications, but discrepancies in the autopsy, compounded by a long standing refusal to release the full toxicology report had fueled conspiracy theories for decades. Now, with fresh evidence from the hidden room, the FBI began piecing together a new and far more sinister interpretation: an overdose of obedience. Among the scribbled notes in Elvis's secret journals were frequent references to compliance, medications, and dose protocols changing again. These weren't the ramblings of a man addicted to pills. They were phrases that implied routine supervision and possibly even experimentation. Records subpoenaed from now-defunct clinics linked to Dr. George Nicopolis, Elvis's longtime physician, painted a chilling picture. Dr. Nick, as he was known, had prescribed Presley over 10,000 pills, vials, and injections in the final 20 months of his life. These included powerful barbiturates, amphetamines, and sedatives, some of which weren't standard pharmaceutical stock. At the time now, forensics uncovered compounds in Elvis's hair and fingernail samples retained from the original autopsy that showed trace elements of experimental mood stabilizers and neuroinhibitors. These were drugs not meant for depression or insomnia. They were meant to suppress memory recall, dampen emotion, and control high-functioning individuals under psychological stress, the kind of substances tested by military contractors in covert trials during the 1960s and 70s. Doctor or handler. More than one FBI agent reviewing the files asked the same question: was Dr. Nick acting purely as Elvis's doctor, or was he under instruction from higher authorities? The prescription logs showed anomalies, recurrent appointments with a military base pharmacy in Memphis, drug shipments that passed through federal channels, and consultations with psychiatrists whose affiliations were buried under layers of redacted documentation. Investigators tracked down one surviving nurse who'd worked in Elvis's care team in 1976, speaking under the condition of anonymity. She said he wasn't in control. People thought he was falling apart. But he wasn't falling, he was being broken quietly. Systematically. That quote hit like a thunderclap across the investigation. Had Elvis Presley been chemically restrained in the final years of his life? Was it to keep him from speaking out about what he'd seen, what he knew, or what he'd been used for? The psychological trail. A team of forensic psychologists was brought in to interpret the implications of the secret writings, the obsessive nature of the notes, the repeated references to memory blackouts, and the precise but erratic detailing of dates and code words. Suggested someone attempting to reconstruct a fractured past, not simply to remember, but to document truths before they slipped away again. There were signs of PTSD, patterns of emotional detachment, and a recurring fear, evident in entries like, "They can't let the king fall apart on stage, but they can dull him just enough to keep the music going." This wasn't the diary of an addict. It was the coded confession of someone trapped inside a body no longer entirely their own. The alleged network ties to the entertainment underworld. A former FBI agent who had worked the Hollywood Organized Crime Task Force was brought in to investigate Presley's hidden connections. After reviewing the letters and coded notes, we began to see similarities between Presley's experiences and the patterns of exploitation and manipulation common among entertainers during the 1960s and 1970s. Rumors of an underground network had long circulated within the industry, especially in connection with the CIA's involvement in cultural control during the Cold War era. Could Presley have been unknowingly part of such an operation? And if so, what role did he serve? Several references in the coded notes hinted at protocols, routines that Presley was expected to follow, and punishments he would face if he deviated. This led the FBI to consider the possibility that Presley was more than just a victim of substance abuse. His chaotic behavior, his increasingly erratic public persona, might have been induced, a way to discredit and suppress him. Medical malpractice and cover UPS. A forensic investigation into Presley's medical records revealed a troubling pattern. New analysis of his autopsy and medical history suggested that Presley's decline was not just due to the drugs he had publicly been known to abuse, but potentially the result of medications administered without his full knowledge. The FBI requested a new review of Presley's medical history, which was met with unusual resistance from the Memphis Medical Examiner's Office. Records from Dr. George Nicopolis were particularly scrutinized. Nicopolis had prescribed Presley high doses of barbiturates, amphetamines, and sedatives, many of which were not standard practice for treating Presley's known health issues. Several of the prescriptions, it was found, had been written under false names, possibly to protect those behind the excessive distribution of drugs. A psychiatrist brought in by the FBI, specializing in mind control practices, pointed out that the drugs Presley had been given were consistent with those used in covert experiments, drugs that could induce memory loss, disorientation, and even personality shifts. The final piece, the timeline. Piecing together the clues, the FBI began to build a clearer timeline of Presley's last years. The secret room and its contents, combined with the letters, coded notes, and the unidentified man in the photo, suggested a period of deep internal conflict for Presley. The final entry in his journal, which had once seemed like a rambling thought of a paranoid artist, now seemed like the poignant final cry of a man, fully aware that his body was no longer his own. Perhaps the greatest revelation, however, came when the FBI discovered a recording device buried deep in one of the journals. The tape, played for the first time under forensic conditions, captured Presley's voice, slow, methodical, and exhausted, speaking what many are now considering a confession of sorts. "They've been trying to break me. I've lost my freedom, my voice. But I can't be broken, not until the last song is sung." What these final, cryptic words mean will be up to investigators and Presley's surviving family to decipher. But one thing is clear: Elvis Presley's death and the mystery surrounding it is far from the closure the world has been led to believe. And the mystery room, well, it's exactly that, an enigma that will continue to keep the minds of the discoverers open. What do you think the room was for? Tell us what you think he was up to. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.